Jai Hind friends, I'm Major Gaurav Arya. Like, subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon. You've been seeing what is happening with this new initiative of the Ministry of Defense, this initiative called Agnipath. There are various opinions, especially amongst the veteran community, whether this is good for the armed forces or bad for the armed forces. There are trains burning. There is government property being vandalized by youngsters who feel that they've been wronged. But beyond all this emotion, what are the facts? What is Agnipath? Today, I have with me one of the most credible names in the geostrategic national security space and also amongst all the veterans. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome to Chanakya Dialogues English, Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, former GOC 15 Corps and currently Chancellor, Central University of Kashmir. Sir, Jai Hind and a very warm welcome, sir.
Jai Hind to you. Madhavan, thank you very much for inviting me to the program, and Jai Hind to all our viewers.
Sir, before I ask you about the problems plaguing this, a lot of viewers had actually said that we'd like to understand what Agnipath is and why was it required in the first place? Wasn't the original plan or the previous plan of induction of recruits stable enough? Wasn't it yielding the desired dividends? What was the requirement of Agnipath? Why Agnipath?
See, Gaurav, yes, that's a very good question to begin with. And what I speak will be obviously a perceptional aspect. What people need to know is that the current system before Agnipath will be adopted is that a soldier, and this is all applicable to soldiers, not officers, but soldiers below officer rank. The recruitment system is that you are drafted for 15 years, extendable to 17 years. And if you don't get promoted or you wish to leave, you leave with a pension in your hand for life. Normally, people will leave at the age of around 36, 37 if they don't get promoted. If you get promoted and you want to treat this as a career, as a continuing career, you can go up to become a Subedar Major, honorary captain. That means it will take you to the service level of 28 years or 30 years, and you exit thereafter at the age of around about 50 or so with a pension for life once again, and you have the options to be able to pursue some other career thereafter. So this is the aspirational aspect is very important here. Most of India was very comfortable with this. The youth are very comfortable with this. Here is a great career opportunity, a profession considered for its honor and pride that it provides in the people. And the comfort level with this of the whole of India was very, very high. 75 years that we have been following this system. Now, suddenly, there is a need, which was, I think, felt a few years ago, that the pension outflow is too high. And that instead of such a high pension outflow, can we have a system by which people come in for a lesser period of time? The contract is smaller. They leave with a package, what we normally call a golden handshake. They leave with a package which gives them an opportunity to pursue a second career. They're not left on the roads as such. Give them some opportunities in other organizations at the behest of the government itself. And thereby, the money saved as a result of the pensions being reduced, that same money can be used for capital expenditure of the armed forces, which essentially means investment in modernization, purchase of better equipment, etc. On the face of it, this is a perfectly rational argument. Now, many people make this argument that this is the norm followed internationally, and India was following a very old system of, long contractual periods for soldiers, etc. Primarily, you need to bring down the average age profile of the soldier, which is at the moment in the Indian Army 32 years. And the intent is to bring it down to about 25 to 26 years. So that is the intent, and most armies around the world, people are quoting Singapore, Israel, and things like that. But the only aspect of critique here is that Singapore and Israel are not India. Very small nations, 9 million, 10 million population, and not the kind of poverty levels, not the kind of aspirational aspects that people have in the ground to look for careers in the armed forces. So it is with this broad rationale that the government of India decided to review this whole thing and felt that it could reduce the pension outflow, it could bring down the age profile, it could still give a career option to the people if they wish to remain. The best of them, 25%, will be retained and who continue to earn a pension. So this is the broad understanding and rationale of Agnipath. That it would elicit this kind of a response, it was perhaps not envisaged. And one of the reasons I can put forward is why this is happening is because this is a very, very complex aspect. Human resource management is never easy to understand. And this is a very essential part of human resource management. The information which is available, it is available. It's a question of comprehension and understanding. I think the people are not understanding it. The youth who had great aspirations, particularly those in the last 2 years, since there has been no recruitment over the last 2 years, and these people all have been preparing themselves. They've spent a lot of money in coaching, etc. They suddenly found themselves on the road and said, "What about us? We've already done our medical. We've already done our physical tests. What about us?" Everything goes down under. So these are many of the people who are expressing their angst at the moment outside of what you're seeing in the streets, which is all available on the television screens.
So, so one thing which I wanted to ask you was that, you mentioned about the pension and the salary bill being very high, and the need for modernization, which is one of the various logics that were given for introduction of the Agnipath scheme. Now, what is the reason that the youngsters who are protesting, sir, and I think without exception, all of us condemn this burning of trains, and this is not something that you would want the future guardians of this country to be doing if they think of themselves as guardians. Sure, they have a genuine problem and a genuine complaint, sir, but the burning of trains is not okay. My question to you, sir, is why aren't these people being absorbed into the Agnipath scheme? So some person says, "I've cleared my physicals, I've cleared my written, I've cleared everything." Because I'm saying this from the perspective of being a short service officer, sir. During my time, it was, you're very well aware, sir, that during our time it was 5+5, sir. Then it became 10+4. But during my time, a lot of us, I mean, thousands and thousands of us, sir, who did not get permanent commission or did not opt for permanent commission or had to leave because of medical issues or some other issues, sir, they were out on the roads and they managed to find their way. Maybe the training and the education system were different. Being officers, we were more exposed than a Jawan, and there could have been a lot of reasons. But I'm just trying to find if a parallel exists. So why can't these people who have qualified join the Agnipath scheme, and are they being considered for the Agnipath scheme, sir?
At the moment, I think the way the armed forces are looking at it is that recruitment came to an end last 2 years, and now with the introduction of the Agnipath scheme, everything starts anew completely. And therefore, anyone who has gone through the physical tests, etc., will have to re-enroll himself to be put through all this. Perhaps, as I said, the government is showing tremendous flexibility. You already seen that based on a feedback, a tweaking has been done, where as a one-time liberalization of the policy, they've added 2 years to the age profile for the current year, 2022. So that goes to 23. The upper age limit goes to 23. Perhaps with a little more understanding, a little more interaction and feedback, perhaps people could also consider that all those who were cleared the recruitment process, so to say, except the written test, could be very well be considered as for the Agnipath scheme, and they would only probably go through the new system of only perhaps the written test or whatever it is. That I'm sure the government of India would agree to it. The armed forces would agree to it. It's just a matter of a little negotiation, a clarification as such. But to come back to your point, I still do believe that officers of the short service cadre, being officers, being of a higher intellectual level, ability to think through, comprehend these issues, and then also look for a second career because they're all well-educated people. It was perhaps not so difficult. Although I always feel that short service officers were just being thrown out on the street as such, being left to fend for themselves, and no one was really catering for a second career for them, including the fact that under the AV Singh committee, actually a cabinet approval exists, which says very clearly that there will be a appeal factor, which means essentially that officers who have not made it in their promotion or short service officers who are exiting the armed forces will be absorbed laterally in different organizations. That has yet to see the light of day. That's the assurance which is again being put out by the government. And a lot of veterans, a lot of people on the streets are questioning it. And they're saying, you made these promises before and somehow they didn't work. So all this is there in the melting pot and causing a lot of angst. As I said, we need to keep repeating that the purpose of this introduction of the Agnipath scheme was noble or is noble. And it is for good administrative reasons, saving money, bringing down age profile, etc. But the debatable aspect, which many of the veterans are looking at and many of the serving people are looking at, is how will it affect your combat effectiveness? That's the most important, the aspect of combat effectiveness. This question also came up at the time of the Rashtriya Rifles. Maybe we may like to discuss that aspect.
No, absolutely, sir. In fact, I had that at the back of my mind, sir. I spoke to a couple of officers, sir, very, very senior, sir, who were part of the group of officers, not one single person, but a whole lot of them, sir, who initially raised the Rashtriya Rifles. And they said that, a lot of aspersions were cast on the Rashtriya Rifles itself. Ye kaisi fauj hai? I mean, because Rashtriya Rifles was at the time of raising, sir, nothing like the Indian Army had ever seen, sir. It was extremely radical for its time. And you had all these people coming from all arms and services into one melting pot of a Rashtriya Rifles battalion, which dovetailed into a sector, which sort of dovetailed into a force, and so on and so forth, sir, in 15 Corps / 16 Corps. And people could not comprehend it, and there were a lot of aspersions cast. But slowly and slowly, over a period of a few years, Rashtriya Rifles made its name, sir. And today, you yourself, sir, on record, you have said that it's India's finest military experiment. Are there any parallels that we can draw or learn from, sir?
Yes, Gaurav, we can draw some parallels, and there's some very good articles out in the public domain on social media, etc. And I know some of the people who were involved in the raising of the Rashtriya Rifles have written and expressed these sentiments. You and I have done a whole full program for Chanakya Dialogues on the Rashtriya Rifles, where you correctly say that on record I mentioned finest experiment that India has done, military experiment that India has done. 1991, 92, 93, the beginning years of the Rashtriya Rifles, these were the aspersions that were cast. Because everyone, first of all, it started with as a project for ex-servicemen. Then they said, no, let's not have ex-servicemen, let's have a contribution from different regiments, units, etc. Now you are bringing together a conglomeration of people from different armed services, etc., and thinking like hell that a commanding officer from another alien regiment would come and put all of them together and make this force effective. I remember a particular book on the raising of 14 Rashtriya Rifles, which is from my regiment, the Gaurav Rifles, and it's an excellent book to show you the challenges which it is written by General Sanjay Bhide, and he has really recorded it as to what were the challenges that he was facing when putting this force together and how it started transforming itself. What I strongly believe in is that there is a resistance to change in India, in the Indian armed forces. We have a certain comfort level, which is a natural thing. 75 years we have gone through this system of recruitment. It is not easy overnight to tell a person, this is all gone, it's all vaporized, now we'll have a new system. People who have got those mindsets, who have been thinking about a career in the armed forces, who have been working 5-6 years and invested money in training, etc. What about them and what about the aspirations? that's a human aspect, but it doesn't get built into these decisions. So it's a natural challenge. But such challenges, the Indian armed forces, the Indian army, we've seen it in Kashmir and we've seen it in Siachen and places like that. We always overcome these problems particularly through the dint of our frontline leadership, the middle level commanding officer, the company command. I mean, what was Kargil? What has been Siachen all these years?
Absolutely.
Kind of challenges we have overcome is all through the dint of hard work, the ability of that young officer to be able to carry his men with him and foster that regimental spirit. The RR, the kind of spirit today in the RR, it's amazing to just go and see that Jazba. If you have been visiting them so often, that Jazba which is there in an RR unit. So I'm not saying these are exact parallels, but yes, there are lessons that we can learn from, and we can have a degree of confidence, particularly the people who are affected, those who are going to come into this whole scheme. They need to have a degree of confidence that the armed forces can carry them through. We need a degree of assurance, definitely, from Civi Street, which means the corporate world, other parallel organizations such as the CAPFs, the bureaucracy and things like that. Everyone has to chip in. It is not the responsibility of the armed forces. Everyone has to chip in to make sure we can carry this scheme through. Because at the end of the day, this is a transformation which is taking place, which will help us modernize the armed forces themselves.
No, absolutely, sir. You mentioned about the CAPFs because this is great manpower, sir. And the only reason why 75% of them would be going out after 4 years is that there is vacancy only for 25%. I'm sure more than 95% are capable because they've been through the regimental grind, sir, even if for 4 years. And it's very serious grind for a soldier, even an officer, young officer, sir, that they have to go through. What would you expect in the future, sir? A lot of people, a lot of state governments have said, no, we'll give them preference in hiring in the state police. So we'll give them preference. There was talk about CAPFs also. Do you think that would help sort of mitigate this problem, sir, if they knew that after 4 years, they'd be taken care of? Because by simply saying that we'll give you preference, it means nothing, sir. It means nothing. Here is a person who's putting his life, his career, his future on the line. And suddenly you say that, okay, we may give you a preference. That sounds very iffy to me, sir.
It sounds iffy to almost everyone because there's been a bad experience of this. The armed forces have been at the wrong end of the stick in terms of the assurances which have been given to them over a period of time. And no one has really, despite, as I said, despite existing approvals by the cabinet, Government of India, these things have not been executed because people have been able to stonewall all this. So it's very welcome that we are getting these responses from different organizations and at the highest level, ministerial level, etc. I can only suggest, and perhaps this is for people to consider, one of the ways by which these assurances get transformed into credible assurances is through the legislation route, right? I always say that I draw a parallel in my mind about the Disaster Management Act. If you didn't have the Disaster Management Act enacted by the Parliament of India in December 2005, all that you're seeing today in terms of the disaster management infrastructure, the capability which has been developed over the last 17 years would have been a pipe dream. Absolutely. The raising of the NDRF, the creation of the NDRF, 16 battalions of the NDRF virtually on a Rashtra Rifles pattern. Right, there's been a transformation in the domain of disaster management, is something which I look after today. Right, I'm just drawing a parallel from there. Now, today, just hypothetically, if a legislation was to be passed to say that this is how the end of the Agnipath scheme, how the management of the exiting personnel will be done. So many percentage of vacancies will be reserved with so-and-so organizations, with so-and-so. Every state government is required to ensure. Now, the moment this gets converted into a bill, it becomes law. Now, I was reminding some people, you remember in the United States, there was such resistance to theaterization, the resistance to integration of the armed forces, etc. And finally, in frustration, in 1986, it was time of President Ronald Reagan, that they enacted the Goldwater-Nichols Act, which made it a law that you have to carry out theaterization. You have to put everything together in terms of integration. So if that could be converted into a law, everything got executed because of it. The similar, I'm just drawing parallels. Similar assurances could be given through this route. Credibility of parliament, credibility of the legislative system in India, democracy that we are, very, very high. And people will all then perhaps listen to it. This is just a suggestion. Obviously, there are legal experts, there are parliamentary experts who will look, constitutional experts who will probably look at this as to what is the viability of giving such an assurance by the government.
Absolutely, sir. You said that there was this committee, I think AK Singh committee you mentioned, sir. There was a cabinet approval about peeling off of short service commissioned officers, sidestepping into CAPFs, but it did not happen because there was stonewalling at various levels. Maybe bureaucratic hurdles were put up, and this could not happen, and SS officers were left out in the lurch to fend for themselves. My question is, sir, and it's a very obvious question, because do you think this has led to trust deficit? Because if the veterans do not believe, if so many veterans, and some of them, sir, decades and decades senior to me, if they're coming out and saying, hey, there is a problem with this, right, sir? It's also because the past experiences haven't been so good. Is that also so, sir?
That committee was called the AV Singh Committee, Arun V. Singh Committee, sir. Very, very important landmark in the history of HR management of the Indian Armed Forces. 2001, as a result of the Kargil Review Committee, this was formed, and it gave its report in 2003, and 2004, this was finally adopted. Yes, and you're absolutely right that this aspect of second career for the young exiting officer, soldier, by virtue of the fact, particularly for officers, by virtue of the fact that the organization is pyramidal and you can't have everyone getting promoted. So you have as high as 60% wastage at the first level, and thereafter almost 50% wastage at every level of selection, leaving very, very few people to reach the higher ranks. So it's basically to cater for that all these proposals were made to see how can people sidestep laterally into different other government organizations. I don't blame people in other government organizations. They've got their aspirations. They've also got their own careers to look after, how to see the career management of their own cadres and things like that. But perhaps a reservation, a little bit of a reservation, 5, 10, 15, 20%, can always be afforded for people who are putting their life on the line and who are perhaps undergoing the greatest privations in the kind of responsibilities that they are undertaking for the nation. This was well realized, and this was built into these schemes at that time. But as we said, they could not get executed. And all the veterans know this, and they speak about it. This is normally drawing room talk among a lot of people within the armed forces. So this credibility factor is, I agree with you, there's a slight trust deficit, which needs to be overcome. And I'm not saying the legislation is the only way by which you can do it. There are lots and lots of things. Perhaps we can put our minds to it together. As I said, and I always like to repeat, the government has taken an approach which is flexible, right? No one is saying that such a scheme has been made and is cast in concrete, cast in steel, and that we will not waver and we will not change. No one is saying that in government. Everyone is understanding that this is a 75-year-old system which is being changed, and therefore, the more inputs you get, the more kind of understanding and interaction you do, the better will be the feedback. One of the ways someone suggested, not me, someone having a much better mind and brain, suggested that why don't we treat this first 2 years of the scheme as a pilot project itself? Look upon it as a pilot project. I mean, it's introduced, it is there, but look upon it as a pilot project so that at the end of 2 years, you do a quick, comprehensive review and take home the lessons that have emerged from it. The government looks at it seriously, see the end of the day, the proof of the pudding is combat effectiveness. Leave out everything else. Leave out jobs and leave out this and leave out that. Everything depends on combat effectiveness. Are all these things going to affect the combat effectiveness? The moment that happens, then you got to take serious note. And then the government and the armed forces have to sit together, put their minds to it and see how can that be overcome.
So my last question to you, sir, is in two parts. Part one is obviously a lot of people have asked me, sir, because you have all these very senior veterans on social media, on television saying that, no, this is wrong, and some of them are saying this is right. What I have been telling people, sir, for the past 3, 4, 5 days, ever since this thing blew up, is that whether a veteran supports this or does not. Support is too strong a word, sir. I mean, I'm just saying whether a veteran is for it or against. They come from a place of immense love for the organization, sir, because the reason why they're objecting, sir, even on social media, and some of them very vociferously, is the fact that they and their families have sacrificed everything for the forge. And when they see a change which they think in their minds is going to negatively affect that army that they have served, obviously, sir, there will be some sort of a reaction. And it comes not from a place of negativity, but from a place of intense love, sir. That is my first thing which I'd like you to comment on. And secondly, sir, haven't heard too much from our brother officers in the Air Force and the Navy, sir, about it. This is my part two of my last question, sir, because rarely has anybody passed a comment. What's on with the Navy and what's on with the Air Force in this, sir?
See, as far as the Air Force is concerned, I'm sure, of course, it's the Air Force for the Air Force to comment upon this. They are much more technical in their content, and the officer is the frontline soldier there. He's the pilot. So everything else is supporting him. All the people who come into the Air Force are essentially looking at the technological aspect, the administrative aspects, etc. Will this affect their effectiveness? The aspect of only 4 years. After all, if man comes in and is an aviation technologist as such, and then you are pushing him out after 4 years without an assurance, obviously it's going to dismay him to quite some extent. So I suppose the Air Force are the best people to comment upon that. But I can draw a parallel of the Air Force Navy to some of the technical arms in the army. You see, one of the things which is being done in this scheme, which is not very clear to people, is that they have reduced the basic training level from 36 weeks to 24 weeks. It's fine. I still think 24 weeks is good enough for basic training. I have been mentioning this, that 24 weeks, I would welcome a soldier with 24 weeks into my unit, put him on the job with better trained soldiers, and within a couple of days, you'll find that the bonding will be there, and on-the-job training will ensure that he's an effective soldier. The question is of technical arms, Corps of Signals, Corps of Engineers, the EME, etc., who do basic military training and then do specialized training subsequently. There's no mention of this in the scheme so far, and this needs to be dwelt upon a little bit, because what happens is that if you give specialized training now, that will eat further into the time that is available, the residual time that is available to serve out the 4 years. Right? In the 4 years, 24 weeks you've gone through. If you do specialized training for another 24 weeks, then virtually 48 weeks have gone through, and then you count annual leave and casual leave and things like that. And effectively, a man is doing duty for actually 2.5 years or less. So a lot of people are suggesting, I've heard suggestions since I've been interacting with lots of people. The suggestions which are coming are, why don't we increase this to 7 years, for example? The tour of duty to 7 years. And they're drawing a parallel to what happened in the 70s. In the 70s, color service used to be 7 years. I still remember a lot of people, we had to send home people into the reserve list, and we had to select people for them out of the blue. It was a very difficult process for a company commander. I still remember as a young officer, trying to nominate a person that you, Bula, will go home. Of course, you will earn a pension subsequently, but you will go home and be on the reserve list. Very, very difficult. But there was a system of 7 years. A lot of people served only 7 years and went home thereafter. So a similar something, a little tweaking to increase the overall, exploiting the investment that you are doing in training, particularly in the technical arms. But obviously, you can't have different terms and conditions for technical arms and infantry, the frontline arms like infantry, armor, etc. So I think as a part of the pilot itself, as a part of considering this as a pilot, this is one of the issues which should be gone into in great depth. Are we taking the best bang out of the buck? And if the government is investing so much of money, we need to make sure that we are drawing out the best from the people that we are training, and perhaps a little extended time. I know one of the connotations of extended time is that the government will also have to pay out gratuity. This aspect can be discussed out, levels of how much has to be paid, etc. All this can be. This is a matter of detail which can all be discussed out. But I think a very, very basic thing will be extending this period to some extent. It could be 6 years, it could be 7 years, or whatever. It won't affect the age profile to such a great extent. Even if the age profile comes to 27, 28 years, these are all young men. 27, 28 that's the age at which most of us, many people are doing the commando course or any other physical courses in the army. There's no problem at all, right? In fact, our colonels at the age of 37, 38 are physically so fit, they can outrun many of their own jawans and the young officers and things like that. So fitness in the army is something which can always be catered for. And therefore, tweaking and increasing the age profile may not really be such a problem. Your first part of the question about veterans feeling a little dismayed about this whole thing, assurances, etc. I think we covered it largely under the response which I gave, which included the issues of legislation, etc. I think we need to do a little more interaction. There is, unfortunately, with this one rank, one pension issue caused a lot of consternation, and it created a cleavage between the veteran community, the government, etc. I think we need to put our heads together, come back together, and ensure everyone is looking for the good of India. No one is looking for anything else. It's ultimately the good of the country, the armed forces. So that is our intent, purely.
Thank you very much for your time, sir. It was indeed enlightening. Ladies and gentlemen, with Lieutenant General Syed Atta Hasnain, we spoke about Agnipath, why it is required, what are the pitfalls, what are the plus points. There was a great, if not a comparison, at least some factors of the Rashtra Rifles and when it was raised, that was put forth. And then General Hasnain also gave us a path forward, what can be done in terms of rehabilitation of the Agniveers. And finally, after OROP, if there was a cleavage between the government and the veterans and other agencies, I think everybody should sit together, because in the end, whether it's the government or the veterans, everybody wants betterment of India and everybody is concerned from that place. It comes from a place of love and affection and a great deal of regard for the country and for their arms and services. Thank you very much for watching. Jai Hind.